Ash. Folks in Southern California seeing something they don't often get to see: snow. About a foot of it falling in the San Bernardino Mountains. It does fall up there, but not usually this early and not usually this much. Smaller amounts covering some of the desert areas and lower elevations as well. Kids, of course, taking advantage of this situation, starting snowball fights and building all kinds of snow people. Meanwhile, more rain for part of the nation that's seen plenty of it recently. 15 more inches of rain falling over southeast Texas this weekend, flooding homes and businesses, shutting down roads. Look at that, forcing hundreds of people to evacuate homes in their boats. From Studio B Live, let's get to Phil Keating, who's in our Dallas newsroom with details. Phil?
Shep, 2 firefighters and the person they had just rescued are now safe this afternoon after all 3 of them had to be rescued after their rescue boat tipped over. That happened in the town of New Braunfels near San Antonio. Now, aside from the widespread flooding across much of Texas, the weather system may also be a factor in that deadly plane crash this morning. A charter plane landing in Houston on its way to pick up former President George Bush. But first, let's start with the flooding. It is widespread throughout much of the state of Texas. This comes after a long, wet weekend of very steady rain, with some parts of southeast Texas getting 12 inches, other parts 15 inches of rain. Cars and trucks almost disappeared underwater. About 250 residents had to be evacuated Sunday by emergency rescuers motoring around in pontoon boats and rubber rafts. Hundreds of homes and businesses now have costly flooding damage.
Older people that didn't think the water was going to be that bad, and it rose up real quick and they just got trapped.
And then there was just chunks of concrete and stuff coming out of the air, it looked like.
Yeah, pieces of the plane.
It was all over the road. It was like a movie. Everything was flying through the air.
That's how witnesses described the early morning crash of a charter plane on approach to Houston's Hobby Airport. It wasn't raining at the time, but thick fog may have been an issue when the plane hit a light pole, shearing off its wing. The plane was on its way to pick up former President George Bush, who was scheduled to fly on that plane to a conference in Ecuador. Bush has now suspended his trip. 2 pilots and a flight attendant on board died. Now, much of the Lone Star State remains swollen, soggy, and oversaturated. It has been raining here seemingly nonstop for a week or more. Tornado warnings are also in effect around the Houston area and for much of central and southern Texas. Not only tornado warnings, but also hail and high wind warnings. And of course, the forecast tomorrow, Shep, more rain. Back to you.
Imagine that. Phil Keating live in our Dallas studios. Well, those storms over the big state still churning, bringing with them large hail in some cases, damaging winds in some, and of course the threat of tornadoes all along the way. With us here in Studio B is our Foxcaster Janice Dean, the weather machine.
Those poor people in Texas, I know. And all of that moisture is eventually going to affect us in the eastern seaboard for Thanksgiving, Shepard. All right, here we go. We have our thoughts and prayers out for you in Texas. We also have winter storm warnings and watches for parts of northern Arizona, southeastern Arizona, and also into north and central New Mexico. We're going to see a lot of snow in those mountains in the desert southwest. Here's that moisture we were talking about through Texas. Most of central and eastern Texas under some sort of flood watch, flash flooding, also flood warnings in effect for places like Houston, San Antonio, and also into Dallas probably tomorrow. Here's where we have that tornado watch box in effect for Houston, Austin, and Galveston, this southeastern portion of Texas, and that is good until 7 p.m. Central Time. So again, we've already seen plenty of tornado warnings, meaning that funnel clouds have been spotted by Doppler radar, some of them in the Houston area, so please be very careful. And with that, of course, the threat of flooding. Here is our flood map, and that extends anywhere from Arizona through to Mexico, most of Texas, into Louisiana, Mississippi, and all the way up to the southeast and the mid-Atlantic states overnight tonight. This is where this storm is eventually going to move into. And some of these areas, the yellow and the red you see here, 1 to 3 to 4 inches. As Phil mentioned, we saw up to 15 inches of rainfall in parts of southeastern Texas. It's not over yet. Shepard, back to you.
Janice Dean, thanks very much. Now